I woke up with sand in my mouth, the sun burning through my eyelids, and my father's last words echoing louder than the wind. "We already told her you were dead. Don't make us look like liars. My parents had drugged me, dumped me in Death Valley, and left me there so my brother could raise my daughter as his own. They didn't even have the decency to pretend it was an accident." My father smiled before closing the SUV door. My mother never looked back. The heat wrapped around me like a furnace. The air shimmered above endless stretches of cracked earth and jagged rock. My phone was gone. My wallet was gone. Even my wedding ring had been stripped from my finger. They had erased every trace of my life before abandoning me to become another nameless body swallowed by the desert. What kept me moving wasn't hope. It wasn't survival instinct. It was the image of my 6-year-old daughter, crying while strangers told her that her mother had died. I imagined my brother comforting her with fake tears, slipping into my place one lie at a time while my parents watched it happen. Every painful step through the blistering sand forced a single realization, deeper into my mind. This hadn't been a crime of passion. It had been planned. They had drugged my dinner. They had driven hundreds of miles without saying a word. They had chosen one of the hottest places on Earth because nature would finish the job without leaving fingerprints. By the time anyone looked for me, there would be nothing left but bones and another tragic story people would stop talking about after a week. My family hadn't just stolen my future. They had stolen my daughter's mother. As the desert wind scraped across my skin and the horizon blurred in the crushing heat, I made one silent promise to myself. If I survived Death Valley, I wouldn't come back looking for revenge fueled by anger. I would come back with patience. And by the time they realized I was still alive, everything they had built on my grave would already be falling apart. My name is Evelyn, and for most of my life I believe loyalty could survive anything. I was the dependable daughter who paid my own bills, showed up for family dinners, and answered every late-night phone call when someone needed help. My parents praised me in public, but behind closed doors, I was the child expected to sacrifice without asking questions. If my brother wanted something, everyone quietly agreed that I would find a way to make it happen. When my daughter Lily was born, she became the center of my world. Her father had passed away in a construction accident before she turned 2, leaving us to build a quiet life together. We didn't have much, but our home was filled with laughter, bedtime stories, and promises that I would never leave her behind. My brother Daniel noticed how attached Lily was to me. At first, his interest seemed harmless. He offered to babysit, bought expensive gifts, and acted like the perfect uncle whenever other people were watching. Looking back, I realized he wasn't building a relationship with her. He was rehearsing for the role he intended to steal. I ignored the warning signs because I still believed blood meant trust. Every uncomfortable feeling was explained away as stress or grief. Every strange conversation was dismissed as a misunderstanding. The hardest lesson wasn't discovering that strangers could betray you. It was learning that the people who know exactly how to break your heart are often the ones who helped build it in the first place. At first, the changes were so small that questioning them made me feel unreasonable. My parents began insisting that Lily spend more weekends at their house. They called it giving me a break, even though I had never asked for one. Whenever I arrived to pick her up, she was already dressed in clothes my mother had bought, as if they were quietly replacing every piece of me they could. My father developed a habit of watching instead of speaking. He would glance at me over the rim of his coffee mug, exchange a brief look with Daniel, then let the silence settle until I filled it with nervous conversation. Daniel always smiled at the right moment, calm and reassuring, but it never reached his eyes. Little comments began slipping into ordinary conversations. "Lily seems happier here." "You work too much." "Children need stability." None of the words sounded cruel on their own. Together they formed a picture where I was slowly becoming unnecessary. Then they started correcting Lily in front of me. If she ran to hug me first, my mother would gently remind her to thank Uncle Daniel, too. If Lily talked excitedly about our weekend plans, Daniel would quietly mention a bigger surprise he had waiting for her. Every gesture felt carefully measured, never enough to accuse, always enough to make me doubt myself. I didn't realize they were testing how easily I could be erased. By the time I noticed the pattern, they had already begun rehearsing a future, where my daughter would remember me only as someone who used to be there. The moment everything changed didn't happen in the desert. It happened the night before. My parents invited me over for what my mother called a fresh start. She cooked my favorite meal. My father opened a bottle of wine, and Daniel spent the evening laughing at stories from our childhood. It felt rehearsed, but I wanted to believe we were finally finding our way back to each other. Halfway through dinner, I noticed Lily had fallen asleep unusually early on the couch. My mother quickly covered her with a blanket and told me not to wake her. Then she slid another glass toward me and smiled with a warmth I hadn't seen in years. The last thing I clearly remember was reaching for my car keys. When I opened my eyes in Death Valley, their plan was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact. Hours later, after forcing myself across the scorching desert until I reached a remote service road, a passing truck driver found me barely conscious. In the hospital, doctors confirmed what my body already knew. A powerful sedative had been mixed into my drink. Someone hadn't just wanted me unconscious. They wanted me gone, lying in that hospital bed, weak but alive. I stopped asking why my own family had done it. That answer would come later. The only question that mattered was how far they had already gone. When I finally borrowed a phone and called home, the number was disconnected. When I called Lily's school, the secretary paused before quietly saying, "I'm so sorry for your loss." That was the moment I understood. They hadn't tried to kill me. They had already replaced me. The detectives wanted me to tell my story immediately, but I asked them for one favor instead. Don't announce that I'm alive. They exchanged curious looks, yet the evidence already spoke for itself. The toxicology report confirmed the sedative. Hospital records established the timeline. The truck driver who found me could place me in Death Valley, within hours of disappearing. My silence wasn't about hiding the truth. It was about letting the people who believed they had succeeded keep talking. Before Lily was born, I had worked for 7 years as a senior compliance investigator for a financial consulting firm. My job wasn't chasing criminals through dark alleys. It was following paperwork, electronic records, and tiny inconsistencies that most people overlooked. I had learned that people rarely destroyed every piece of evidence. They usually left behind one careless signature, one timestamp, or one confident lie. Using a secure laptop provided through the investigation, I quietly began collecting exactly that. Property records showed my parents had started transferring assets only days after my disappearance. School documents listed Daniel as Lily's emergency guardian. Insurance paperwork had been submitted with remarkable speed. Someone had even begun probate proceedings using the assumption that I was dead. Every document carried a date. Every date created a timeline. And every timeline exposed intent. I didn't need revenge driven by rage. I needed patience, evidence, and one opportunity to let every lie collapse under the weight of its own paperwork. When that day arrived, I intended to walk into the room alive, say almost nothing, and let the truth speak louder than I ever could. The hearing was scheduled to finalize Daniel's long-term guardianship of Lily. My parents arrived dressed in dark, respectable clothes, wearing the calm expressions of people who believed grief had made them sympathetic. Daniel sat beside them, one hand resting confidently on a folder that contained every document. Built on the lie that I was dead, I waited outside until my attorney gave a single nod. When the courtroom doors opened, the quiet was almost unsettling. My footsteps echoed across the polished floor. My mother looked up first. The color drained from her face so quickly that she gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling. My father's confident smile disappeared before I spoke a single word. Daniel slowly turned around. For the first time in his life, he had no prepared answer. I simply walked to my attorney's table and sat down. The judge stared at me, then at the death paperwork filed by my own family. Detectives quietly entered through the rear doors, carrying sealed evidence boxes. No dramatic accusations were necessary. The toxicology report, surveillance footage from the restaurant where we had eaten, phone records, and financial transfers were introduced one after another. Each exhibit erased another excuse before it could be spoken. Lily looked across the courtroom, confused for only a heartbeat. Then she whispered, "Mom?" She broke free from her seat and ran into my arms. That was the only moment I allowed myself to cry. Behind us, I heard handcuffs click shut. I never looked back. The people who had buried me with a lie were finally forced to face the truth, alive, undeniable, and standing right in front of them. Silence had carried me farther than anger ever could. The news spread faster than I expected. Neighbors who had attended my memorial service stood outside the courthouse in stunned silence, struggling to understand how a family could convince the world their own daughter was dead while she was fighting to stay alive. Friends who had quietly drifted away during my death reached out with apologies, while others admitted they had ignored small warning signs, because they trusted my parents without question. My parents' reputation didn't collapse because of gossip. It collapsed because every lie was backed by evidence. The court suspended their contact with Lily immediately, and criminal charges moved forward one hearing at a time. Daniel lost more than his freedom. He lost the image he had spent years carefully creating, the man who wanted to be seen as Lily's. Protector was exposed as someone willing to steal her by destroying the person she loved most. Lily's recovery was slower than mine. She woke from nightmares convinced I would disappear again if she let go of my hand. So I stopped making promises that sounded impossible. Instead, I showed up every morning, every bedtime, every ordinary moment that proved I was still there. The hardest thing to rebuild wasn't my career or my home. It was trust. That's why this story matters. Evil rarely arrives wearing a warning label. Sometimes it smiles across the dinner table, calls itself family, and waits for you to doubt your own instincts. But truth has a stubborn way of surviving, and when it's protected with patience instead of panic, it becomes something no lie can outrun. For a long time, I believed revenge meant making the people who hurt me suffer as deeply as I had. I was wrong. Real justice arrived the day I realized I no longer needed their approval, their apologies, or even their explanations. The courtroom gave me accountability, but peace came much later, in the quiet moments when Lily laughed without fear and our house finally felt like home again. Life didn't magically return to what it had been before Death Valley. Some scars never disappear. I still wake occasionally from dreams of endless heat and empty roads, but those memories no longer control me. They remind me of the woman who refused to die when her own family decided her story was over. I eventually returned to investigative work, helping victims of financial fraud and family exploitation uncover the truth, hidden beneath carefully crafted lies. Every case reminded me that deception can survive for years, but evidence has a way of waiting patiently for the right moment to be seen. Lily grew older knowing the truth, not to fill her heart with hatred, but to teach her the value of honesty, courage, and healthy boundaries. We built new traditions, celebrated quiet victories, and surrounded ourselves with people who proved that family is defined by love, not blood. Sometimes people ask whether I ever forgave my parents. I tell them forgiveness isn't pretending the past never happened. It's refusing to let the past decide who you become. They left me in the desert believing silence would bury me forever. Instead, I walked out of that silence carrying the only thing they could never steal: my life, my daughter, and the truth.